Seconds after the captain of American Airlines Flight 965 from Miami to Cali, Colombia, announced their descent into the airport, the plane started shaking and shifting directions violently. Panic and confusion swept through the passengers as the turbulence grew unbearable. Some began to pray for their lives. In the cockpit, the captain and first officer were desperately trying to regain control as collision warnings blared. In front of them, all they could see was darkness. Just 1 minute earlier, the air traffic controller had granted them permission to land, but now they were lost in a pitch-black Andean night, losing altitude and hurtling through the mountains at 500 kilometers per hour. In a matter of seconds, dozens of lives would be lost in a horrific crash, leaving people buried under twisted metal or consumed by the explosion. Experts would deem this a no-survival scenario. Yet, miraculously, some managed to live to tell the tale. The tragedy shocked the world. The Boeing 757 was one of the most advanced aircraft on the market, piloted by experienced and decorated pilots. Because of the turbulent political and criminal climate in Colombia, there were suspicions of a terrorist attack. Were communist guerrillas or powerful drug cartels behind this tragedy? Today, we'll explore the findings of specialists, flight records, and survivors' testimonies to unravel the mysteries behind one of the most puzzling flight accidents in history. How did 4 passengers beat the odds and defy death? On the fateful night of December 20th, 1995, a massive plane carrying 163 people crashed into the unforgiving Andes Mountains. But among the smoldering wreckage, lifeless bodies, and hostile forest, some miraculously clung to life. But their ordeal was far from over. They found themselves stranded in a hostile jungle, teeming with wild creatures and prowled by communist guerrillas and drug cartels. The rugged mountain terrain made it nearly impossible to initiate a rescue operation until hours later. Among the passengers was Mercedes Ramirez, who was celebrating her 21st birthday with her parents. A few seats away sat Mauricio Reyes, a 19-year-old college student eager to reunite with his family in Colombia for the holidays. There were just 5 days until Christmas, and the plane's atmosphere was festive. Now, due to harsh winter conditions in the northern U.S., many flights had been delayed, and the crew had to wait almost 2 hours to allow passengers on connecting flights to arrive. Then, just past 6 p.m., the flight finally took off. They were on a 3-hour journey to Cali under a darkening sky. By 9:30, Captain Nicholas Tafuri requested permission to land at Cali's airport. The air traffic controller authorized a direct-to-Cali route. This set in motion a chain of mistakes. The captain interpreted direct as a command to land, with no need for any more position reports to the ground. So he input it into the flight management system, wiping out all previous data. On the ground, the controller was operating blind because the airport's radar had been sabotaged by a local militia months before. He needed to rely entirely on the crew's position reports, not realizing there would be no more coming. The initially assigned runway required the crew to bypass the airport and make a U-turn. Without a position report, the controller assumed the plane had enough time and distance to land on a different runway, positioned in the front of the airport, and he suggested this change to the captain. The crew accepted the offer. Despite knowing that they would need to scramble to lose altitude, they were eager to make up for lost time in Miami. So they deployed the speed brakes, an action that they would soon regret. They barely reviewed the protocol and entered it into the plane's computer, making maybe the worst of all mistakes that led to the accident. The introduced protocol was wrong and would lead them hundreds of kilometers away from Cali to Bogota. The plane continued losing altitude. At the same time, it set its course toward the imposing peaks of the Andes. 1 minute into the new route, the cockpit crew realized their navigation error, but it was too late. They were hurtling toward a mountain wall. As the ground proximity alarm went off, the crew fought desperately to gain altitude, but the deployed speed brakes were still holding them back. Back in the cabin, passengers were in a state of panic, dealing with unbearable turbulence. Mercedes clung to her father's hand, seeking solace in her mother's prayers. The plane crashed atop El Diluvio Mountain, just a hair's breadth away from clearing it. Due to the lack of any night vision equipment, the Colombian Air Force had to start their search a painful 8 hours after the crash. Around 6:30 in the morning, an Army helicopter finally spotted the crash site. Mercedes awoke the next morning, her body racked with pain, only to find her parents lifeless beside her. Mauricio Reyes was right there and helped her get out of the plane. A few rows away, Gonzalo Dusan regained consciousness. His back was severely injured, but the sound of his 6-year-old daughter's voice nearby pushed him to crawl toward her. Unable to free her, Gonzalo dragged his battered body from the wreckage to look for help. Outside, he briefly heard his son's voice, but the boy was too severely injured to indicate where he was. When the Colombian army arrived, they found the young boy alive, hanging from a tree. Tragically, he gave in to his injuries on the operating table. Only Michelle, Gonzalo, Mercedes, and Mauricio emerged as survivors of this harrowing ordeal. But questions remained. What had caused the accident? And how did they survive this dramatic crash? After exhaustive investigations, experts attributed the tragedy to the flight crew's failure to follow strict protocols, confirming computer commands, and underestimating the time required for crucial tasks. All of this was compounded by the lack of radar infrastructure and the air traffic controllers' limited English communication skills. In an effort to make sense of the seemingly impossible, experts theorized that Michelle, Gonzalo, Mercedes, and Mauricio survived because they were seated over the wings, where the aircraft's massive girders offered the strongest protection. Afterward, new regulations were implemented to prevent such catastrophes. Terrain awareness and warning systems are now mandatory on transport flights, helping pilots avoid flying into the terrain, no matter how bad the visibility is.